Welcome to Behind the Highlighter, where I share key points from books about lean, continuous improvement, leadership, self-improvement, and business culture. On here, thanks for joining us. So I am a bit of a lean continuous improvement junkie, and I'm also a bit of a knowledge junkie. So in my pursuit of knowledge, I stumbled across some really amazing people and some really amazing books. So I'm really privileged today to have Brian DeFonteny here with me. I consider Brian a friend and a mentor and an inspiration. And I remember a time where I was sitting in a room before I really even knew a whole lot about what lean continuous improvement was, and had this wonderful, engaging instructor up front talking about how he can't wait for Sunday night because he gets to go to work on Monday. And I just remember sitting there thinking, boy, I wish somehow, some way I could have that feeling. And through his mentorship and some of my experiences, there are quite a few Sunday nights right now where I do have that feeling. So when I heard Brian was writing a book, I was really excited, and then once it got published and I was able to start getting a copy over in my hands, I blew through it pretty quickly and just really enjoyed it. It's a wonderful story about continuous improvement and respecting people. It focuses a lot on leadership behaviors, and you'll hear terms in here like traditional manager. So Brian does not cut any slack in here to the traditional manager. So for those who aren't out there respecting people and empowering and engaging them, he's very critical in this book, and I think that's really fantastic because it does set the bar for what a leader should be when it comes to lean and continuous improvement. So I'd like to right now just have Brian kind of introduce himself, give everybody a little bit of the background about himself, and then we're going to talk specifically about his wonderful book here, Leadership Reimagined: The Impacts of Continuous Improvement and Respect for People. So Brian, welcome. I always love talking with you. I'm really excited that I get to share a conversation with a broader group now, because we always have so many wonderful conversations. So thanks for talking with me. And if you could just give everybody a little bit of your background.
Well, happy to be here today, Lucas. Thanks for doing this. So I was first introduced to the word and the concept of lean back in 2000. I was working for the federal government and didn't realize what they were doing at the time, but they were sending a lot of us to training. They were teaching us the tools of lean. And of course, we were all going through the belts, the yellow, the green, the black, and so forth and so on. And at the time, this was going back, a couple of decades now, I thought I understood what lean was all about. And then I didn't really see dramatic improvement in the federal government, certainly not in my organization. And I knew there had to be more to it. So I began doing my own research far beyond what the training was providing for me. And I came to understand at some point, this epiphany came over me, that the tools alone are completely inadequate without understanding how management needs to behave to support people, to empower them, to create a business culture where people want to improve conditions and processes, and they want to be part of it. How do I create all that? That was all missing with the standard lean training. It just wasn't there. It was very, very tool-based. And so I began to explore that at depth and immersed myself in the topics and read everything I could get my hands on, and basically just shifted gears with my own training. I was teaching at the time, and I began to put much more emphasis on management's role. I did a deep dive into Dr. Deming, and that was just an incredible piece of my awareness at the time. I always encourage people to read about Deming. And all of a sudden, the pieces just started to come together. And I was looking at companies that were very successful with it. Why were they more successful than others that went down this path? It's because they understood you've got to create a business culture where people understand what empowering other human beings means, and empowering them towards what. Deming uses the term system aim versus a mission statement. They're kind of loosey-goosey the same, but they're really not, because if you go into most companies and ask people what their mission statement is, they don't know. They've got to look it up, and even after they read it, they don't quite understand it. It's full of ambiguity. But a system aim, as Deming described, was something very, very succinct, 10 words or less. What the heck are we trying to do in the long term? And once you understand this and everybody is marching in the same direction and leadership is passionately focused on empowering people, setting them up for success towards that system aim, now the tools come into play and process improvement can really work as a collaborative effort across an enterprise. Unfortunately, most trainings do not include this. They are absolutely tool-based. They will show you how to process map things. They will show you how to build a Kanban and all of these tools. A lot of books are written very, very tool-based, but after having experienced this for 23 years now, I recognize that without the business culture piece, without managers evolving into leaders, without everyone working towards a system aim that they understand and they collaborate on and they agree upon, the entire effort is moot. And so that's kind of a synopsis of everything I learned from my very beginnings of lean training back in 2000 to where my head is today in 2023 and understanding the bigger picture. And this is precisely the holistic message that Deming was trying to convey to the world back in the 50s and 60s, and it fell on deaf ears. And even today, when I teach my MBA students at the University of Oklahoma, they don't even know who the man is. It's never been presented to them, and they've been through business colleges at the lower undergraduate level, and it just doesn't get incorporated. But it's a must for my students, and so that's kind of where I am today with my progression through Lean.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you sharing that, Brian. And, I definitely recognize that you were my first introduction to Deming. Prior to you, I did not know anything about Deming, and I've done, a bunch of my own research, and I know you and I have had many conversations about it. I've leveraged the kind of concept of system aim in a lot of different places, and it's extremely powerful, and appreciate you sharing that. I feel like you kind of mentioned in there that you had a more emphasis on the management role and the behavior of managers in there. And I feel like when you and I first got introduced, you had already made that pivot, correct?
Yes.
I think those early meetings with you, I just remember that being the focus. And I was in a management role at the time, and you really did challenge us to think about how much we were empowering people and what type of engagement we were providing. And were we respecting our people, right? I mean, that was just on the forefront of it. I think I heard the term servant leader quite a few times in some of your early trainings. So yeah, I noticed that pivot.
Used quite a bit in companies, servant leadership, and I don't really think people understand completely what that means. When one is behaving as a servant leader, they see the employee as their internal customer. As a servant leader, it is my job to supply you with everything you need to be successful towards the system aim, versus a traditional manager sees employees as working for them. It's completely 180 degrees out. And I think this is one of the reasons that Toyota was so successful with it, because they had the business culture to go along with the tools, and other companies would come in and observe them and watch them and see how their processes to build a car were like a choreographed dance, but they didn't understand the business culture piece behind it, the respect for people. How do I posture a human being for success versus I give them a job, I hand them some tools, I say go to work, and I leave them to their own means of dealing with problems and so forth and so on, and the constraints that they come up with, well, that's just part of the job. And that's the distinct difference between traditional management and servant or lean leadership. It's all about people.
Great. Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think at one point I've heard you kind of talk about like what's the simplest way to get people to understand something, and I believe you challenged us at one point in time as people that were in charge or in care of others, supposed to be in a leadership role, to ask yourself, are you a resource or a constraint for your team? And I just, that sticks with me. I remember that, and I ask myself that fairly often. If I'm doing something, I tend to say to myself, was that a constraint? Did I just put a constraint there for them, or did I become a resource for them? And I would just share that because I think it ties in well to what you just talked about on servant leadership.
One of the questions I ask my audiences often, if I get a whole audience full of supervisors, I ask them, are you a constraint or a resource to the employees that report to you? And many times they often say, well, I'd like to think that I am a resource. And I said, well, what is the reason you don't know the answer to that? And they pause, and I said, well, how do you think you could find out? And they say, well, I guess I could ask. And it's just not a standard procedure for a manager to say to an employee, help me understand how I'm making your job more difficult, because they just don't think about it like that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I know you've challenged me with that over my lifetime, and I appreciate it. So I want one more, one question I want to ask you, kind of about your background and career, and then I really do want to start spending some time on the book itself, because I think there's just a lot of great stuff in there. I've shared it with lots of people already. I plan on sharing it with lots more. So when we kicked this off, I talked about, maybe a seminal moment in my lean journey was listening to you talk about how you felt on a Sunday night. So I'd like to just kind of throw it at you. In your journey, has there been that type of seminal moment, and where was it, and who provided it, and what did it mean to you?
It lasted for about 6 months. I had just left the federal government after 35 years of service. I took a job with a company in Oklahoma City, and for a variety of reasons, all the stars aligned. I was working for a gentleman that was the director of process improvement that admittedly was struggling of how to do it. And he was 100% receptive to me as the subject matter expert versus him telling me what I'm going to do, how I'm going to do it, and so forth and so on. He was nothing but a resource. He was never a constraint. He was always asking me, what else can I do to make your job better? I was traveling. I was teaching all over the country. It was perfection. Everybody was curious about how to do these things, and there was just amazing receptivity to that. But as things go, management changed, and that sense of nirvana didn't last, and it was disappointing, but at least I got to experience it for a 6-month period of time where I could not wait to get to work, and weekends were my disappointment 2 days of the week because I wasn't at work doing what I love to do. And I often ask people, how do you like your job? Well, it's okay. And you can sense in their body tone and their language that they don't absolutely love going to work. And it takes a very special business culture for that condition to manifest across a large group of people.
Awesome. Well, that's great you shared that story, and I think it's a great segue to the book because I think I know what you're talking about, and I'm pretty sure you mentioned him specifically in this book multiple times. And I think you even tell a little bit of that story in here. So let's go ahead and talk about this. Leadership Reimagined: The Impacts of Continuous Improvement and Respect for People. So like I said, I've obviously read it multiple times now. When I read, I'm still old school. I like the paper book. I like to use the highlighter. I like to mark things that jump out to me. So I've got all kinds of pretty colors and markers in this one. Actually, interesting story. I bought multiple copies of this after I read it the first time because I knew there's a lot of people I wanted to share it with. And I inadvertently handed out my marked up copy thinking it was a clean copy. So I went back through and remarked up another copy, but it was a really wonderful exercise because there's so many great things in here on both sides of the coin. So there's a lot of great content in here that says, as a lean leader that respects people and inspires continuous improvement, do these things. But then you tell a lot of side stories about where that behavior, I would say maybe the opposite was being done. And I think you even have a really great graphic in there that shows a compass that shows the right behaviors on one side and the opposite behaviors on the other. So you share a lot of what good looks like how it should be done correctly or well, but also a lot of those real life experiences of where it wasn't. And I think that's a really great way for people to learn, because you know, if you're being honest with yourself, you can read some of these what you call side stories. So you've got them all over the book where you say side story. you can read a lot of those and just challenge yourself and say, have I done that to people within my organization or my team? And if you have, you really should think seriously about changing your behaviors. And I know um, I've read a couple and said I've done that very thing, not understanding how that could be negatively impacting the culture and the team. So I really like the way that that's written. So if you could, maybe just give us a little bit why you wrote the book, so maybe some of the nuggets that you really want people to get out of it. And then I'd like to just randomly grab some of these highlighted sections and just talk about it with you, if you don't mind.
So one of the things I often emphasize in the book and to my audiences are the distinctions, first of all, between a traditional manager, which is someone that is command and control, do as I say, I am playing cop, I'm auditing you to make sure you're doing your job, that kind of thing. It's a polar extreme behavior. And on the other side of the coin, 180 degrees out from that, is the lean leader who is trying to posture the individual for success, continuously trying to do this with everything they need to be successful. Do they have the right tools? Do they have the right information? Do they have the right environment? Are they getting the right feedback? Do they have the right software? Anything at all that's making the job harder than necessary for the person becomes that supervisor's mission to close those empowerment gaps. And I will say that those extremes have not manifested in my lifetime in any human being. I've never seen anyone extreme on either side. Usually they're somewhere in between, and people oscillate from day to day. Monday and Tuesday, I'm leaning more towards a supplier mode servant leader, but then on Wednesday, I shift back into command and control. I get upset, I yell, I tell people what to do, how to do it. So I'm moving back and forth. So I want people to understand that even if you work for or are a very traditionally oriented type manager, it doesn't mean it's a bad person in play. It means this person is a product of their business culture, and they're just not behaving as in a manner that they could be. They're not bad people. They just have bad processes of playing supervisor to others. I just told an audience the other day that the toughest job in the world is to be a good supervisor. Anybody can be a supervisor, but to be a really good one is very, very difficult. It's okay, so what does a good supervisor look like? And this has, boy, did I learn the hard way. A good supervisor is someone that is relentless and is in closing empowerment gaps. I'm constantly looking for them. Where does Lucas struggle with something? I've given him a computer that's not fast enough. I've given him one monitor, he needs 3. I've given him more tasks than he can handle in a day. Where am I making his job harder than necessary to accomplish the system aim? So that becomes the daily focus of a lean leader, of a servant leader. They're in supplier mode. They see themselves as a supplier to those employees trying to do the work, versus the other extreme, the traditional manager. They're laser focused on making the monthly numbers, appeasing those above them, profit, 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 all the downstream things, versus the leading indicators that would produce the downstream positives. They're not focused on the right thing. And this took me a lot of years to put all these pieces together, but when I did, there was no going back. And I tell all my audiences, if you only have a tool-based training and a tool-based approach to process improvement, you've got a Ferrari with no wheels or tires. It'll sit there and make noise. Gauges are moving, everything looks cool, but it will go nowhere. You cannot have true sustainability. And companies that behave like that typically will have huge turnover rates. People don't look forward to coming to work. They do their job. They find the absolute minimum threshold to get by without getting fired. And management just doesn't understand what the missing piece is. And it's that servant leadership, that lean leadership, that empowering human beings is my #1 priority. That's the piece that's missing. So that was a huge part of what's in the book, and is part of my message in all my classes and presentations that I give.
Thanks for sharing that. I just want to circle back for just a second to something you said a minute back there, because I remember you and I talking about this quite often. And I do remember, the first time I read this book, you can think of when you talk about some of those poor behaviors. I was kind of inclined to get a little bit frustrated. I started thinking about people who've done that to me, and it was like, oh, bad manager. And I know you've talked to me about this a lot, and I firmly believe this is true. They're a byproduct of the culture they're in, and it's
Exactly.
not their fault. So it becomes kind of my job to then start to inspire them and help them understand that there is a different way and the culture could be different. And not to sound too business cliche, but the win-win, a better team, more engaged, more empowered team of workers is going to make things better for that supervisor who's trying to do the right job but might be have some bad habits from the culture. So I'm glad you shared that, because I think somebody reading that and not thinking about the why they behave like that could maybe be a little disrespectful towards maybe a past manager of theirs. And I think
Oh,
that's
sure.
one of the big messages you try and send, is that everybody deserves respect. I know I said I was going to go to quotes later, but I really I'm going to grab one right now, because I think
Okay.
this is a good point for it. But I've got to highlight it right here, and I'm going to read it just as it says it here. It is at the end of the book, but you put it in all caps and in bold. And even if you wouldn't have, I would have highlighted this because I think it's a great message. Every employee deserves to be valued, respected, and inspired to contribute to something larger than their assigned job tasks. So great sentence. Maybe you could talk to us a little bit about that. And
I'll
it's
tell you
all
where
caps and it's bold for a reason, right?
I'll tell you where that came from. I'm a huge reader, and one of the authors that I admire very much is Simon Sinek, and he talks about why. Why do you do what you do? Why do you exist as a business? Why do you perform this service? Why do you build this product? Whatever it is. So I sat down and I thought, well, why do I do what I do? Why do I teach classes at the University of Oklahoma? Why do I help companies understand what lean leadership looks like? And so that's the language that I came up with. Why the heck do I do what I do? And truly, every human being does deserve to be valued and respected at work. They really do. But unfortunately, many of them are not, because the business culture, A, doesn't really understand what that respect for people piece looks like. They think it is limited to, I give you a fair salary, I treat you decently when I speak to you, I call you by your name. Well, those are all just hygiene factors. What is it about the job? What is it about the environment that you're asking me to do this job in? Those are the respect pieces that a Toyota, a Barry Waymiller, a Menlo, a Nucor, a company like that truly understand. That is the respect for people piece that goes far beyond just giving you a fair salary and a compensation package that's equal with your peers. And so that is my why of what I do, and I wanted the whole world to understand that. And I think I haven't looked at my profile page on LinkedIn in forever, but I think I have it there as well, because I want people to understand, why do I do what I do? It's certainly not for the pay. I mean, I would do it for nothing if I could watch a company go from the current state to a plethora of lean leaders seeking to empower others throughout their day, every day. I mean, that would be just a wonderful thing to see. So that's where that statement came from.
Well, thank you. Thanks for sharing that. So off of that, can you share with us maybe a little bit about, how writing this book supports your why? You talk about how important that is to you. And obviously it's one that's important to other people because it's outward facing. Can you share some thoughts about how, writing this book supports that why?
For my own particular situation, I've had a lot of opportunity to be in the workforce. As again, I said, from 74 through 2018. And for a huge chunk of that, I never really felt valued. And what do I mean by valued? Like, at the end of the day, do I feel like the people that I work for, do they really appreciate what I did and how I did it and the effort that I put into it and so forth and so on? Or do they just see it as a transactional relationship where I do the work, they pay me? It's that sense of feeling valued that human beings want, and they seek it They don't even realize sometimes they are seeking it, but they know something's missing. If you look at the way people jump from job to job to job in our country, they're looking for something different. They're just not seeking a bigger paycheck all the time. They want to feel valued. And it is the savvy manager that understands this, that has done the research, that continues to read, that immerses themselves in the topics. What does it look like when an employee feels valued? And how the heck do I, as a supervisor, generate that condition so that it will manifest? What do I physically do? So that was a big part of the book too. I wanted people to understand there is a better way to treat human beings other than hiring them, handing them their tools, throwing them in the deep end, saying, do the best you can, I'll be back to check on you later. It's the furthest thing from empowerment. It's the furthest thing from servant leadership. And it is, by and large, the exact opposite of the way a Toyota, a Barry Waymiller, a Menlo behaves. So I just wanted to share that with the freaking world to say, hey, look, there's a better way, and this isn't just theory. There are companies doing this with great success.
Awesome. Great. Thanks for sharing that. So a question I have that as you were talking there kind of came to mind for me, you know, there's leadership right in the title of the book. And you know, I was actually in a formal leadership role the first time I read it, and then was not in a formal leadership role the second time I read it. But regardless of that, can you talk a little bit about kind of what you feel like maybe a target audience for this book would be? You know, do you see it as leadership? Do you see it as those frontline people, you know, people that are steeped in lean, people that are not? Do you have any kind of thoughts there on, while you were writing this, what type of people did you expect or would hope would pick this up and embrace it?
I will answer that, but I also want my audience to understand that the most difficult part of writing that book for me was the title. It was long written. What am I going to call this thing? And I looked at some other titles, leadership books, and they just didn't do it for me. What the heck am I trying to say that's different from what other authors have written? And it just kind of came to me because I am trying to reimagine how human beings could behave in a different manner and get completely different results from the relationships between supervisors and employees. So that's where the name of the book came from, because it absolutely is Leadership Reimagined. And I also want to distinguish, and I do this very early in the book, between a manager and a leader. In our country, when a person gets promoted and they're a supervisor, unfortunately, we bestow the label of leader upon them. One of the least desirable terms I hear in companies is our leadership team, because I know who they're talking about. They're talking about the C-suite and the people that are in charge. But in the world of lean, in the world of servant leadership, leadership is a behavior. It is not a title. And therefore, anyone can behave as a leader by trying to empower another human being, and no title is required. So I often tell some of the supervisors that I interact with, can you imagine your entire workforce, not just the people with titles, your entire workforce behaving as leaders on a regular basis, trying to help others, intentionally collaborating with others, intentionally empowering others without having to being told to do it. And so that the title is irrelevant because it's a behavior of empowering others. So that applies to everyone that could possibly read the book, because it is not, and I want to emphasize this, it is not targeted towards those in positions of authority. Even though that's a big bulk of what I'm talking about, it's an audience of everyone, because leadership doesn't have to have a title. It is strictly a behavior of empowering another human being. So I see Lucas struggling, trying to log on to some piece of software. And I said, Lucas, let me show you how this works. He said, oh, I never knew that trick before. I'm not his supervisor. He's not mine. Neither one of us are supervisors. I just did something to make something easier for another human being. And that's closing an empowerment gap. And that is a leadership behavior. So even when that's not done as a formal authority type role, it's still leadership. And that's why I say Leadership Reimagined, because too often We only equate the label of leader with the person in charge.
Awesome. Yeah, great response there. And I think this is good time. I need to share a nugget here that, a group of us that Brian strongly influenced. Brian says, you'll hear this a lot if you look at his LinkedIn page or ever interact with him, words matter. And, I heard that from you an awful lot. And you use the word intentionally collaborate and intentionally empower and things like that. And there's a large group of us that very intentionally use or do not use the term leadership because of Brian has really challenged us to think about what are leadership behaviors, and that is not a job title. That is a set of behaviors. That is a way of believing. So yeah, leadership is a word that we very much pay attention to in a lot of groups that you've impacted. So really interesting. I didn't know that that's how you got the title, but thanks for sharing that.
I like that you brought up words matter, Lucas, because I want to share a quick story with you. One of my MBA students several semesters ago, he is a officer in the Air National Guard, and he said to me partway through the class, he said, "This is helpful to me because now I know how to better interact with my subordinates." He used the word subordinates. And I said, "Can I share something with you?" He said, "Absolutely." I said, "If I was to recommend something to you, it would be to never use that word again, subordinates." He said, "Why?" I said, "Think about it. When you are referring to people that report to you as your subordinate, then we know that they are, but using that word, you are conditioning them to defer to you, to see you as someone above them, and rather than a co-collaborator towards the system aim." And he didn't say much about it. He made a quick, you could see his mind was working a little bit, but about an hour later, he said to me, "Oh my gosh, I never, ever made that connection with that word before." He said, "I'm going to promise you that I will never use it again." I don't know if he did or not, but it was just kind of cathartic for him to recognize that using that word subordinate is telling another human being, I'm in charge and you're not. So that was pretty cool.
Right. Yeah. Words matter.
Words matter.
That. Right. So is there anything else you want to share about the book in particular, or do you want me to start throwing some one-liners at you from within the book?
Throw them at me.
Right. Okay. So I'm turned to your section on VOC. So that's voice of the customer. So I'm going to go here. It says a leader ensures all his or her employees are fully aware of downstream customers, has translated them into performance indicators so workers are aware of the extent the requirements are being met every time the process turns on. So, I've seen that in action. I've seen a lot of people struggle with that, where that is not coming from within the organization. Those expectations are not clear. So I do firmly believe in that sentence, and I'm just kind of interested to hear kind of your thoughts around, how does a leader even do that if they're not doing it today? Or, how does a leader know if they are doing that?
Great question. So I'll share a little conversation I had with you with a person in HR recently. This was last week, and they were describing their onboarding process to me. I said, when you onboard a new employee, do you tell them specifically who is their downstream internal customer and what that person, that group of people, that organization requires from them? Well, no, we give them their job description, so forth and so on. I said, so if I don't know who my customer is downstream, how can I possibly intentionally collaborate? Because I don't know their requirements. I don't even know who they are. And she said, you think that needs to be part of an onboarding process? I said, what do you think? And she just paused for a minute. She said, it would be kind of cool if they knew that stuff up front. Well, there you go. And that's how a supervisor can posture an employee for success on day one. Lucas, this is your job. This is what you're going to do. This is your downstream internal customer. This is what they require from you. The level of quality they require, the detail they require, so forth and so on. Here's what good looks like. Here's an example of what you'll be producing. This is A+. to give everyone an opportunity to be successful from the beginning versus I spend weeks or months hunting and gathering all this information and making lots of mistakes along the way and potentially blaming myself versus the broken process of the supervisor when they onboarded me on day one. So that's something really concrete that can be done to empower a human being up front with voice of the customer.
Good leadership behavior.
Yes.
Fantastic. So I'm going to turn to another one here. I really like this one. Leadership sets the expectation and then behaves in the communicated manner themselves. So I know you have a phrase that kind of talks about this that we all still use very often, but that one I don't know that I have a question for you on that one. I think maybe I'd like to have you just go a little bit deeper on that one and maybe give some examples of some of those behaviors and some ways that they could be displayed.
Sure, but even when I say business culture drives everything, I absolutely mean it. So imagine a new employee starts out and they're going to meetings and they're interacting with all these new people. They're collecting data. They're watching management. How does management behave? How do the employees interact with that manager? What is okay to say? What's not okay to say? They're collecting data of the way that that manager behaves and the repercussions or consequences of it. They want to replicate the good consequences. They want to avoid the negative repercussions. And that's why that behavior modeling is so critical of the supervisor. Because if they're modeling, I want everyone's input, I'm not the smartest guy in the room, I need everybody to speak up, psychological safety is really important to me, I want to hear what you have to say, Lucas. If they're modeling that behavior, then the employee is going to replicate that because they're seeing it produce good results with other employees versus the opposite. So if the supervisor wants a particular behavior to manifest in their team or across an enterprise, then they need to model it themselves. If you want people challenging processes, then you need to encourage people to challenge processes. And you can't ever say things like, well, that is a really stupid idea, because now you're conditioning that employee to never speak up again. So that constant modeling of the desirable behavior is so important. And therein lies the deficit that we have for training supervisors. If we don't teach them these things, what does good look like? They're just going to replicate what they've been exposed to. And the transition doesn't ever occur.
Great. That was the phrase. What does good look like?
Still gets uttered
many times by a lot of folks. What does good look like? So it's interesting because the next one that I have flagged that I wanted to share, you kind of started touching on this a little bit right there, which is interesting. And this particular one was actually a real challenge for me. And I would believe it's a challenge for a lot of folks, in our industry, in the industry I'm in, it's a lot of technical folks. So I have an engineering background, and if you're strong technically, you tend to get that promotion, right? And so then you're now in a leadership role by job title because you made some really smart decisions and maybe you were technically savvy. And so this next one here was a real challenge for me, and it took a lot of practice for me to get better at this. And I still stumble sometimes, but I understand the power of it. So I'm going to share it here and just kind of get you to maybe go a little deeper on this one as well. But you say in here, leadership doesn't dispense solutions, but instead supports trained teams to find root cause and countermeasures. Managers who have now evolved into leaders give clear direction based on VOC and act as suppliers to get employees what they need to meet customer requirements with far less effort and confusion.
Correct. Basically what that's saying is, if I, as a supervisor, am dispensing countermeasures or solutions to a team, even if it's the change to a process that results in improvement, I am the dispenser, I'm the vending machine with all these fixes. I am not developing people with that behavior. I am conditioning them to be dependent on me, to come to me the next time for the fix, versus challenging them. Well, Lucas, what do you think might make the process better? And Lucas says, well, What if we did this instead of what we're doing now? And I know in my mind that my idea is far better than what Lucas just came up with. If I am in developing people mode, I'm going to say, Lucas, that's interesting. Let's try that. Let's go with that. Because my motive is not necessarily to improve the process per se. It is to develop Lucas. Because as he develops, he then becomes independently capable to solve problems in my absence. And that's the dependency that I want to eliminate with lean leadership. Just
Great.
handing over the fix is, and I tell people all the time with Gemba walking that your objective is not to improve the process. It is to close empowerment gaps. You're trying to get other people up to speed. And if you ever reach perfection as a supervisor, you are no longer needed at all. You have created a completely independent, fully empowered human being. And it doesn't get any better than that. That's what good looks like.
Great. And I know I mentioned before, we started talking about this, that I did struggle with this and I still stumble once in a while. So one of the things that I've tried to help me get better at this, and I want to share it, and then I want to hear if you've got any other tips, because like I said, I do feel like a lot of people probably struggle with this. I've become very transparent, and I tell people my job here is to not give you a solution. So if you catch me giving you a solution, please call me out. And I do that fairly often, and I still do it even though I've been practicing and practicing. So that's been kind of my attempt at getting this right, because I know how important it is, because as you talked about, I did see myself becoming a bottleneck, and the energy level was down and we weren't getting results and everything was on me, and I was working till midnight and all those things you really don't want. And I pivoted here, and there are moments where I'm very proud of myself now, because I have worked with teams that have achieved this, and I have not been out there dispensing solutions. But that's kind of been my nugget, is I'm transparent. I tell them, do not let me do this, because it's not the right behavior. So do you have either anything you want to add to that, or any other tip you can give a leader who might be struggling with being a solutioner?
It's probably the most common pitfall, I think, that people fall into, and probably one of the more difficult things for them to extinguish from their own behavioral repertoire. I still do it today, Lucas. I still step in this pothole myself. And so I have to force myself, when I'm listening to someone describe a situation to me, and we'll call it the countermeasure for now. The countermeasure to me is crystal clear what they need to do. And I am so tempted sometimes just to dispense that, to make their life easier. But I try to stop myself and ask them a 4-word sentence instead. What do you think? Just to force them to think. What do you think? I don't really care what they come up with. I don't care. That's irrelevant.
Right.
The act of them thinking and trying to process through a problem situation is the behavior I'm seeking from them, not a fix that makes the process better. And that is a constant battle. I still struggle with it myself.
Right. It's a tough one. What do you think?
What do you think?
Yes, very simple. So I want to move on to another one here. This you talk about a valuable lesson you learned, and I've also learned this lesson, and probably the hard way. Spun my tires in the mud quite a bit here, but you've got a great line in here that says, "Lean is done with people, not to people."
Absolutely.
And so I know when I first started learning this, I was like a fire hose to people around me, and overwhelmed them, because I was doing it to them. I believed in it. I knew it worked, and off we go. And so just kind of curious here if you've got any tips about how do you what are some of the things that would indicate you're doing it to them, and what are some of the things that would maybe indicate you're doing it with them, and how do you avoid the twos and maybe inspire the with?
I think it goes back to one's motivation with process improvement. It is very, very tempting to get into the mode of, I want to improve the process. Now, I'm talking from a supervisory perspective. I want to make the process better. And when you get into that mode, the temptation to dispense fixes is going to be very high, versus your mentality, your objective, your daily agenda is to not first and foremost improve the process. It is to empower others. How can I make more Lucases out there that can help people improve processes? How can I make Lucas more capable of improving his own process? Versus my role as a supervisor, I'm here to fix everything. So it's that frame of mind that one puts themselves into. Am I here to fix the process, or am I here to empower human beings? And the more you can stay in the latter mode, the less likely you are to start handing out fixes and say, well, you know what would make that better? I used to do this job myself before I was a supervisor. Try it this way. And right there, your process is broken. You have failed that employee because you are creating that dependency again. So it's all about that frame of mind. What is my objective? One of the exercises I do with a lot of my audiences, I make them get up and in 10 words or less, I ask them to document what is the primary mission a supervisor should be in on a daily basis. Just to force them to put it into their own words. And invariably, you will see things of making people do their job and making sure we're meeting the numbers and things like that. And occasionally you'll see things shifting a little bit more towards the language of posturing human beings for success and things like that. But this is what I want people to understand as the distinction between a manager and a leader. A leader is developing human beings. A manager is making sure the widgets get made, that we make enough money, that we hit our numbers. Those are very different behaviors. Thus the name of the book. It is absolutely Leadership Reimagined. It is not cookie cutter, do what I said, and I'll pay you every 2 weeks. It's all about frame of mind.
Right. And I think as I'm listening to you speak there, I almost boil it down to the difference between two people and with people, management, two people, leadership with people.
Great story I can share with you. I once worked for a manager that said to me one day, I got this great idea last night. I said, what was it? He said, look at this. I built this template. Everybody can set their desk up exactly like this. We'll have the phone here, pencils here, monitor here. It'll be great. It'll be standardized throughout the entire office. It'll be wonderful. And I said, wait a minute. What problem are you trying to solve? He said, well, look, everybody's doing it different ways. And I said, so what? He was about to impose lean upon people without their input. I said, do you realize the impact that this is going to have? They are going to hate lean. Oh, no, it's going to be way better. What mode was he in? What frame of mind was he in? Fix a process versus developing human beings. Those are very, very different frames of mind. That's why lean is done with people. Hey, guys, how do you think we could make this better? Regardless of what they come up with, and try that versus here's how I want you to make your process better. Frame of mind. Which one are you in? Fix the process or develop people?
Very good. Very good. I want to move into here, Gemba Walk section now. I know you've got a ton of knowledge. You're an amazing coach as it relates to Gemba Walk. I know it's something you care about an awful lot. But one of the things with Brian that I want to share that I remember thinking, if maybe when I grow up I want to be like Brian, I better start writing down some of these things, because he does an amazing job when he's teaching or coaching on painting a picture with words. And I highlighted this one. I just love everything about it. But I also think not only does it do a really good job of painting that picture with words and it puts a little smile on your face, but I also think it drives home kind of the point of Gemba Walk. So I want to share this, what you wrote in here, and then I just want to open it up for you to talk about just Gemba Walk altogether, or you can even specifically talk about that sentence. But this is around a Gemba Walk, which is getting out where the work happens and seeing what employees are fighting, and the fact that if you're not doing this, you're clueless. So it says here, you're clueless to this low-hanging fruit, and then you say, hell, this fruit is on the ground waiting to be picked up. No ladder required. Bring a shovel and a wheelbarrow. I just love the picture that paints, and if you really think about it, to me, it talks about how easy it is to capitalize on improvement if you're doing it well. So either that sentence or just Gemba Walks in general, because I know that's a huge topic for you. Just interested in your thoughts.
So again, if my mental mission is to empower other human beings, to remove impediments in their way? What is the best way that I can become aware of those? I could ask people, so, send me an email and tell me what's making your job harder. Some people will respond to that. Some will not. They just don't feel comfortable sharing those kind of things. But when I'm watching someone perform the task firsthand, I'm literally on the spot, watching them do a job and seeing them fight things that are so easily resolved, I become aware of these empowerment gaps, and with that employee's help, I can close those gaps and make their job a little easier. One of my best Gemba walks ever, I was watching a gentleman changing glycol filters at a compression facility. And before he could take the nuts off the top of the canister that held all the filters, he had to walk about 50 feet to plug in the air hose. This is on gravel. He got down on his hands and knees and climbed under a large above ground natural gas line on his hands and knees. He reached up as best he could to plug the hose in. He couldn't even see where he was plugging it in. And then he walked all the way back and began the task. And I said to his supervisor at the time, who was learning how to Gemba walk, "What did you just see?" And she said to me, "I don't know. What did you see?" She didn't even realize that the employee was fighting. She just considered that part of the job. And then we asked the employee, "Where would you put that outlet if it was up to you?" And he said, right here where I'm doing the task that they do twice a day, every day. Little things like that that supervisors are not necessarily aware of. Now, they think big stuff. Okay, you're working out in the weather and things like that. Oh, sure, those are opportunities, but what about that simple little thing so that he doesn't have to crawl on his hands and knees on gravel? And the Gemba walker is constantly finding these empowerment gaps. And so if you're not doing that on a regular basis, there are many, many things that employees are struggling with that you are unaware of that they probably do not feel comfortable just bringing up. They don't want to complain or whatever their reasons are. But when you're out there watching it firsthand, you're going to see all kinds of madness that people are struggling with that can be so easily resolved. That's your job. Close empowerment gaps. That's
Bring
why
the shovel in the wheelbarrow.
Yeah, that's why Gemba walks are just such a powerful thing. And I tell my audiences, it's probably the single most thing that you could ever learn to do properly. But people, they're not doing it. Even some that have been trained to do it have been trained improperly, in my opinion, because their mode is, I'm here to fix the process. No, no, no. That is not why you were there. You are there to look for empowerment gaps so that you can empower the human being doing the job to come up with the fixes. That's what it's all about.
Fantastic. So, I grabbed a couple of my highlighted. I didn't grab them all. I really tried to pick from different sections of the book. There's very few sections that don't have a whole bunch of highlighter in it, but I really did try and just pick a little bit from different sections to get a little bit of a breadth around the content here. But is there anything that I haven't touched on at all that you want to make sure people know is in this book and is important for them to be thinking about?
I get a question a lot, and I haven't come up with the best answer for people, but it comes up so often that I want to share it with you today. I'll be teaching this stuff, and it will really resonate with people, and they say, okay, help me understand. This is never going to fly at an enterprise-wide level at my company. They're never going to do this stuff. What can I possibly do to incorporate it into my life? Well, this comes about because people are thinking all or nothing. Since we can't do it at the enterprise-wide level, I guess I can't do anything. And I say this to them in the kindest way that I possibly can. If you are on a team of 3 people, 5 people, 10 people, whatever it is, your little tiny sphere of control, maybe it's just yourself. You're just an employee and you're not even on a team. What can you do at your level within your sphere of control to empower other human beings or even yourself to make life easier for them on a daily basis, to achieve the system aim in an easier manner? What can you do within that sphere of control? And if it's only within your office of 2, 3, or 5, you're going to make a difference in somebody else's life. They're going to go home at the end of the day feeling, wow, Lucas really cares about what the heck I'm doing. He's trying to help me out here. And that's enough of an impact in a very traditionally managed company that you are never going to influence at a enterprise-wide level. So you don't have to be able to take on the world to have success with this. You can do it within your own little circle of influence. Even if upper management never buys in, that's okay. What can you do at your level?
Awesome. So as we start to kind of wind down here, is there a specific place that you would steer people to go to purchase the book or go get it?
It's available on Amazon. I think if you just type in the title of the book and put the word book after it, or Amazon, it's going to come up. I encourage people to be critical of what I say. If you don't agree with it, by all means, reach out and tell me why you disagree. I encourage that kind of that interaction because I want people to develop the behavior of challenging things in the first place. And I would be a hypocrite if I did not allow them to do that with the message in my book.
So I didn't look for it in here because I know how to get a hold of you, but is there a specific way you would like people to reach out to you? Is there other resources you want them to see or look at?
LinkedIn is probably the easiest way to get a hold of me.
Perfect.
And so I will share with you now a broken process that I have of my own. My computer is saying battery low because I failed to plug it in last night.
Well, that's unfortunate. I almost never like ending our conversations because we have so many great ones, but I do know that we probably should be winding this up, and we have plenty of content here that I hope really does inspire people to go out and get the book, to learn more about it, to reach out to Brian. But at the very least, there was a lot of information shared here today that should inspire you to do something different, behave differently tomorrow, to empower and respect others. So as always, Brian, I appreciate everything you've ever done for me. I appreciate your friendship, your mentorship, your leadership, your inspiration.